Hello again, students. This is your Professor Ann Babson. I hope you're enjoying reading Othello. I think the language is magnificent if you just listen to the language itself. Just look at the things that Othello says before he actually kills Desdemona in that horrible, brutal way. I mean, he's so brilliant, Shakespeare, in his writing when he says things that are so simple and so portentous, like put out the light, then put out the light. When I teach that in the classroom, you would see me read it aloud with my students and throw the book across the room and say, "Oh, I have spent my whole life trying to be that eloquent, and I don't know that I ever will be." The language itself is a jewel worth examining. But I wanted to talk to you very specifically about the central problem of Othello, which is, pun intended, colored by our own views of race in our society, which is very different than the way that Shakespeare understood race and racism, although he was very much part of a society that believed in racial stereotypes and had some racism, particularly against Muslims, a religion from which the Moor of Venice, Othello, would have converted. What I want to say about it is this. The whole plantation system of colonialism had not started yet. So whatever racism may be present in this play, it is not that racism, because that simply was not available for a possible experience of race. But it is a clear depiction of racism. I think you would agree. We begin with a father being alerted that his daughter is having sex with a black man, basically. That's how Brabantio is woken up at the beginning of the play. And it is very clear that among the grievances that Iago has, surely at some level, race is in the mix of them. He's upset because he didn't get a promotion he feels he deserved. He is upset because he, at some level, is suspicious of Othello's motives with other people. But there are two things that I observe as a reader that are worth mentioning. Number one, he suspects, without any evidence throughout the play, that Othello, who does not seem exactly like a general player, he's not out there trying to sleep with everyone, that he slept with his wife. I note the similarity between that and the racism that has plagued men of color in our own country, from white men who believe they are protecting white women, or tell themselves they're protecting white women from black men. And there is this fear of this hypersexualized black man, an imagined hypersexualized black man that is at once very seductive to white women. Again, this is an imaginary racial construct in our own society, and also one who has broken boundaries that white men have historically felt they should not cross. I see that in the accusation without evidence that Iago makes. He even says he doesn't know it's true. He says it as soon as he speaks the words aloud after "I hate the Moor." He says, "I've heard he did my office in the sheets." I'm paraphrasing. In other words, he went into my wife's bed. I don't know it to be so, but whatever, I'm going to act like it's so. It's a pretty stunning position to take without us considering the racism that Iago feels. Also, we see at some level, because Othello is this outsider, as I mentioned before, I have always been struck by the fact that Othello is quite so very quick to believe that his young bride, Desdemona, who chose him despite parental preferences for surely a rich Venetian guy, perhaps closer to her own age, that suddenly he believes she has committed adultery with fairly limited evidence and relying entirely on, as he keeps calling him, honest Iago, the deepest ironic statement of the play. Why is Othello convinced that Desdemona would change her mind about him? I have to believe that as an outsider to Venetian society, he has a certain level of insecurity. Also, there is a class issue. He is a general, so he is at an appropriate class, but that's not where he's born. He's a guy who rose to the top. Desdemona was born at the top. Maybe that's at play. But surely at some level, he is afraid, given the values of Venice, which values the beauty of fair skin. In fact, we talk about fair Desdemona, and we literally mean she's pretty, who is the fairest of them all, as it says in the fairy tales. But also, who is the fairest is who is the whitest. We are literally talking about whiteness as a mark of beauty. And as a Moor, Othello's not white. And he seems to have internalized some of these feelings that he might be at risk of losing her simply because of his blackness. And that is a stunning conversation for Shakespeare to enter into. Moors, as characters, stock characters in Elizabethan dramas, were considered sneaky. Moors who were Muslims and Jews were not to be trusted in Elizabethan theater. They were both sneaky. They weren't Christians. We shouldn't deal with them. Ooh, be careful of them. And there were many plays that were far less well written than Shakespeare's plays that do this. Shakespeare has an extraordinary talent of humanizing them. Because he can't write a character without wanting to make this character three-dimensional and psychologically available to his audience. He is that good of a writer. He just can't help himself. But the things that he even says after Desdemona is dead indicate that Othello is thinking in terms of whiteness as well. He refers to her as a pearl of Orient that has been cast away. He places his idiom for what he has lost in an exotic landscape where he has lost a white possession. And this is not the feeling of a real black man. Let's be very clear. Shakespeare wrote this play sitting as a white guy in England. He had never been to North Africa. He had never been a Moor. He is imagining and projecting, surely, to some degree, the beliefs of his society about a group of people that he doesn't know very well. But he is nevertheless presented with us in Othello, a very relatable and understandable kind of a man with good intentions. The intentions of the one character we want most to understand, though, who wreaks all the havoc in the play, Iago, he decides at the end of the play, when captured, not to answer the question that we all want to know, which is, why'd you do it, Iago? Why was this your chosen outcome? And he says, I'm not going to say anything. He says it very directly, and then he shuts up. I hate the Moor. He slept with my wife, I'm pretty sure. I don't know, whatever. And he feels bad he didn't get the promotion, so he's going to destroy Cassio too. But ultimately, one of the things that people also don't get to hear an answer to when they ask why, and I think Shakespeare's perceptive enough, even in a pre-plantation version of slavery, to be able to talk about it the way he does in this play, he is able to say what most of us want to understand who are not actively white supremacists, and let me hope that that is all of you listening to this video, that if you ask someone who is deeply racist against people of color, why are you hung up on this? What is your effing problem? I want to say in my New York vernacular to people who feel certain ways about people of color. I, at some level, so feel horror at what they're thinking that I reject it so categorically, I cannot accept it. And their answer is too often, I got nothing to say. It's self evident. I have no explanation. Perhaps it is the mystery that is in one's heart of what one has projected onto someone else. Racism is ultimately a projection of what the person who is feeling the racist thing is projecting onto the other person. If I say that, oh, I don't know, Mexicans are rapists, somebody said recently, you may recall, I may, as a man who has been accused multiple times of forcing myself sexually on women, I may be projecting that thought. It's not me, it's those Mexicans. They're the rapists. Iago doesn't have an answer. At some level, he is not conscious of why he did what he did. At least that's my reading of the racism here. And in that sense, I think it is not a racist play, but a true depiction of racism in a play.